Look, I'd also like to acknowledge before kicking into the slides, I guess a few things. One is colleagues from Queensland Government such as Michael Hogan, Merrill and Strofelt. Also people I've met in recent times, and certainly welcome Tony Trimmingham here, who you'll hear from later. But also, and I don't say this lightly, I want to acknowledge the people in this room. If we are to tackle complex public health areas such as ice addiction or methamphetamine addiction, or even drug addiction more broadly, it takes a complex system response to deal with these sorts of issues. And it takes a lot of effort from all different parts of the system, hopefully working in the same direction to achieve outcomes. So it will involve people in suits such as me sitting in William Street in Brisbane, but it will absolutely involve the people in this room and the part that you play in the system to actually get real outcomes. So I do want to acknowledge both the time you've taken out to be here today, but the work you do on a day-to-day basis. So look, the 15 minutes or so I'll have today, I just want to take you briefly through a couple of elements of the government's action on ice, and also the community engagement process that we're currently engaging in. Now, by way of context, and a lot of these sorts of things that I'll talk about today are not going to be a surprise to the people in this room, and in fact, I suspect you will know and to some degree live some of these statistics and some of these issues on a day-to-day basis. We are in Australia, thank you, seeing quite a rapid increase in methamphetamine use more broadly and in ice use in particular. And I don't know how many of you may have seen some of the coverage in the media in recent days around the work that Shane Darke has been doing. Have people been either reading that in the Journal of Addiction or seeing that in the media? Have people picked up on that at all? Okay, well, I'll mention it very briefly, but Shane's from the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre, and he's looked at methamphetamine use and injuries over the last 6 years or so. And basically, the stats that are coming through are telling us things like the number of deaths from methamphetamines have doubled over the last 6 years. The mortality rate of those using methamphetamine is about 6 times higher than the general population. And the sorts of things you do hear and often associated with methamphetamines, and in particular ice, around increased violence, increased episodes of psychosis, they're certainly there, but also issues such as the rapidly increasing rates of heart issues and heart disease and heart attacks coming from use of methamphetamines. The rapid increase we're seeing in suicides from that are associated with methamphetamine users. So if you do get an opportunity to have a look at the work that Shane Darke has done and others in this area, I would certainly encourage you to. And as we know, to get results in this area, it's going to take, as I mentioned before, a lot of effort from a lot of different parts of the system that we all work in, because no one size does fit all in responding to something like this. The slide up at the moment shows you some stats specifically around ice that we work with, and you will see things there like ice is the largest growing illicit drug in the market. You will see stats up on the slide around its involvement with organised crime. You will see there, and Marilyn will talk about this in a lot of detail, around its involvement in the child protection system. But the interesting thing for me in the discussion around stats around ice and methamphetamine use, one is, as I mentioned, the rate of growth that we are seeing in this space. And the second is, every now and again we see in either media commentary or discussion in general about this around, well, why a focus on ice? there's alcohol, there's tobacco, there's prescription drugs, there's other illicit drugs that are having a massive drain and a massive impact in this country, both in terms of individuals and their families and more broadly on the public health system. And I guess my view on that, and it's for those that remember the old saying about Gerald Ford, the ex-American president, I think we can chew gum and walk at the same time. So I think within a system such as ours, we can focus on alcohol and the other sorts of drugs, both licit and illicit that I mentioned. But I think to say that we would ignore the very real and present, or the clear and present dangers that we are seeing through the use of methamphetamines and ice in particular, we would ignore at our peril. And I think within a system that operates such as ours, there is capacity and there is a desire to deal with multiple issues that we are seeing. Now, the other issue that we've been grappling with, and I'll talk briefly about our Action on Ice plan shortly, is the impact that we're seeing in various regional areas. And this is not something unique to Queensland, and Lindsay certainly mentioned it connected with concepts such as FIFO, or fly-in, fly-out, but there are many, many different elements to this. Something that always makes me interested when I see this work, it's the Criminal Intelligence Commission's wastewater drug monitoring program, and people may have seen that highlighted in the media probably about 4 or 5 months ago, and it's where they go and sample the wastewater systems around various parts of the country and effectively look in the wastewater systems for what people are ingesting and what people are using. And they have found, again, the increasing presence of methamphetamines across sites. Particularly, I think Western Australia, South Australia were the ones that picked up most, but certainly in Queensland this trend is also happening, and the regional sites in Queensland, again like other states and territories, are the ones that are particularly showing up in terms of rates of increase. So in terms of the Action on Ice, so I hope, and I don't expect everyone like me to sleep with this beside the bed, but I do hope at some point over the last couple of months or today people will have an opportunity to have a quick look through our Action on Ice plan. This document at the moment does a couple of things for us. One is it lays out the 65 actions across all government agencies that we are doing to address the impact on ice on our communities. And you can see from that slide, it looks at things around the supply chain, it looks at things around reducing demand, and it looks at the harm minimisation concept, so that we are trying to address this from those 3 major pillars. But what it also does is set up the conversation that we've been having to look, and led by the Premier and by other ministers that you'll see and hear about in a couple of slides, for those conversations with the community, and particularly with those involved by ice or impacted by ice, around what else could be done and about how else government can address and grapple with the issues of the impact of ice. As I mentioned, we've been using that action plan as a basis for these regional consultations. That commenced with the Regional Engagement Summit in Rockhampton on the 27th of April that was hosted by the Premier. The Premier then followed up by hosting a roundtable in Townsville in May. The Attorney General and the Minister for Police recently held one in Moreton Bay. I don't know if anyone, so has anyone been to any of those 3 events? Anyone get the opportunity, certainly in the Moreton Bay one, to get around? So a couple. And there will be other regional forums happening in the next couple of months as we lead towards the end of October, which is when feedback wraps up on the action plan. As I mentioned, and as I'll show at the end, behave. The first regional consultation was held in Rockhampton, and really it focused on how we best implement the current initiatives that we've got in government, what additional initiatives may be required and sought from government, and how can communities be assisted in their own community-led solutions. And so effectively the summit brought together about 150 people, both for the major day event, but also, and I'll talk about this shortly in more detail, about a lived experience event at the end of the day. And so it really brought together practitioners, community organisations, families, and those some that have been addicted, and also various levels of government for that conversation, as I mentioned, around what more can be done, both in terms of a government sense, but also helping and assisting communities, families and individuals themselves with their own actions and activities on ice. And really, we were told, both in the Rockhampton area and in the Townsville Ice Roundtable that I flicked up the slide there, a range of things. And I don't think that the people in this room will get a great surprise from what's on this slide, because this for me has been a consistent feedback through the 3 events held so far, and I suspect you can probably run down this list and tick each of them off in turn. So one is a lack of access to accurate information for both users that are seeking help with their addiction, and also family and community members who are seeking information to help them in their roles to support people with an ice addiction. The second is, and this came very clearly, and I'll talk a bit more about this, the stigma surrounding ice users that prevents them from seeking health or help, and not only further traumatises them, but the families they're involved with. So there was a lot of discussion, particularly in the Rockhampton session, around whenever you see discussion around ice addiction, or whenever you see it presented often in the media or occasionally through, certainly in a few other states, government campaigns, there is a very particular way that ice and ice users are presented. And it is coming less from a care and support angle, and more at times the clear message we were getting from members of both forums, a sense that it's out to further demonise and isolate ice users, and by extension their families. So there was a lot of very clear feedback on the day around when governments are working in the space of public education materials and campaigns around the use of ice, be very mindful of how this information is presented and the impacts it has on users and their families. Third element is really what I'm speaking to there, around how you present the information in a balanced, factual and credible way. The next one is around, and again this was very clear, particularly in the lived experience session. So at the end of each of the 2 forums that the Premier hosted, there was a separate session at the end of the day that the Premier hosted with a dozen or so people who were either addicts or family members. And the lived experience session was effectively there for a storytelling session around giving both the Premier and other ministers who attended a real sense of what that lived experience is like, to help really informed the nature of the government response. And again, a very clear thing that I suspect will not be a surprise to the people in this room was the discussion around the support for family members that are affected by a child, by a sibling, by a spouse who is a user of ice or methamphetamines more broadly. There were a number of instances where there were grandparents who are now primary caregivers for their grandchildren, and the stories they were telling around their efforts to engage with government systems around care and support for their grandchildren and their role as primary caregiver is something that again, I'm sure is not a surprise to many people in this room, but certainly something that's given us pause for thought about what we might do ultimately around where the action on ICE gets. And the final one is the need to increase capability in frontline services. Now, this one was really a conversation about how do we best provide the support, the training, and at a system level, the wherewithal for people that are at the coalface in a number of our primary support areas, both who are working directly in the drug space, but those such as our emergency service responders who may not, it may not be their primary role, but they still often through their jobs come into contact with those using drugs. So how do we improve the capability and the wherewithal for those people? So those issues to date have been the key themes that we've taken away and are working through. The first response to that, if you like, was something that the Premier was very, very pleased to be able to announce out of the recent state budget, which was, on top of a $43 million package that has already been put in place around ICE, and an additional $6 million that we already have around additional specialist services that had been previously announced. An $18 million package that is starting to pick up on some of the messages that were coming out of certainly the Townsville and the Rockhampton events. And you can see in there a breakdown of that $18 million, including the $3.2 million for an information awareness campaign, which again will pick up on some of those messages from that previous slide. $7.4 million over 3 years for support for families, picking up again on some of the issues raised in the room. $3.3 million for the Alcohol and Drug Information Service, expand some services provided under the Family Drug Support Services. So again, the rationale for hosting the large forum in Rockhampton, and the Premier was very clear and very pleased to be doing it in Rockhampton, was on the basis of how do we better understand something like ice use, methamphetamine use in the context of a state like Queensland with its regional populations and its regional issues that we need to address. You will also see there the $4.1 million in terms of the expanding roadside drug testing for police, which some of you will know currently picks up methamphetamine use. And if some of my colleagues from police were here today, they would be able to tell you, certainly by the testing they do, the increase they have seen over the last couple of years in ice use when they've been doing testing. So as I mentioned, this is the initial response that the Premier was very keen to have happening out of the Townsville, the Mount Isa, Townsville and Rockhampton. Moreton Bay, I've mentioned before, the Attorney General and the Minister for Police hosted that on the 14th of July. And this is within the context of what is happening at a national level. So, as I've mentioned a couple of times, the need for all parts of the system in a public health sense to be working in collaboration to get benefits and effects. The work we're doing here in Queensland aligns with the National Ice Action Strategy that COAG launched at the end of 2015. And so we are working both with other states but also with the Commonwealth Government to make sure that the money and the work that we're all doing builds in that synergistic way, as it were, so that we are making sure we're all pointing in the same direction. So as I've mentioned, the action plan is out for consultation. It's currently out until the end of October. And as Lindsay was saying earlier, very keen for events such as this to help generate further feedback that we need when we're looking at the end of the consultation period about how government can best address, how government can best work both within our own spheres but also with our communities around the work that we're doing. So by all means, and I would encourage people to really get involved with this, because as you would have seen from some of the previous slides, and the Premier has a very clear and personal commitment to this, that what was coming through the Rockhampton and the Townsville roundtables has already resulted in some action. And so these sorts of events today and tomorrow, and the sorts of feedback that we're getting through the website here, is actually building to what we will be doing in terms of future action. If you're interested, you can get on and have a look at the engagement website as well, more around the forums themselves. And I think, now using the magic of modern technology, unfortunately, some of you may have heard there's governing from the Gold Coast this week, so I'm heading straight from here down to the Gold Coast, so won't be able to stay. But Jess Martin from my team is certainly here over the next couple of days to talk through things. And I would like to leave you, if I can manage the technology, with a short video that shows you from the lived experience perspective at the Townsville and Rockhampton summits what we have been hearing.
It takes everything away. Houses, kids, friends, jobs.
I've been married to my husband for 7 years now, and he's been ice addict for 5 of those years, and I didn't know. When I found out, it destroyed my whole family.
I've missed most of my early 20s due to it, so, and a lot of time spent away from my loved ones, and I've lost a lot of friends.
I stole my love, my marriage, my trust, my children's sense of security and safety, stole all that from us.
I don't think there's a way it doesn't affect your life, to be quite honest.
As a government, we don't pretend to have all of the answers. But I know that today's summit is a really clear first step. It's a first step in listening, acknowledging that there's a problem, and saying that together as a community, we can do more, we must do more.
There isn't one part of Queensland or necessarily one demographic that is not being impacted by the use of methamphetamine.
Generally, drug trends have started in big cities and often maybe filter outside of that. But this time around it was different, and we were getting calls from regions relatively quickly who were noticing this increase.
It has been kept behind closed doors. People are struggling to cope with it, but we need to give them the strength to be able to talk about it publicly. And that's why I'm so thankful that tonight we'll be able to hear privately those personal shared stories.
I think families' voice needs to be heard. They need to be supported. We have evidence that says that if the families are supported and engaged with the drug user, then there are better outcomes for everybody.
What we know is that there are some things that do work,
So the things that are based on counselling, particularly cognitive behavioural interventions, things that are based on lifestyle and things that are based on support are what we need to do.
There's a lot of misinformation out in the community, there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of stigma and shame around methamphetamine use.
We talked a lot about flexible models of treatment and care, and as well as being culturally appropriate.
Getting the message out that where you get into trouble with methamphetamine, that help is available, treatment works, people do recover, and that they do go on to live, full and productive lives.
We want to come at this, though, from a hopeful perspective, rather than a message of despair.
So we've been able to come through as a proper summit where people have been able to be very open and honest about the issues affecting them, particularly in regional Queensland.
I really like to help in any way I can. I sort of feel it's my job now to help other people.
I want to be able to say to these people that you can get through it. It's hard and it's a huge journey, but you can do it if you just stand by them.
Thank you, and I hope the next couple of days proves to be very valuable for you in the work that we all do together. Cheers.